For most of my childhood, I believed Thanksgiving was supposed to be magical. A day of warmth, roasted turkey filling the air, family gathered around a long table sharing gratitude. At least, that is what I saw in other families. For me, Thanksgiving became a reminder that I was always the one left out. My name is Clara Dawson. I am 29 years old, and this is the year when Thanksgiving turned from a painful memory into a disaster I could never forget. Growing up in Spokane, my parents Margaret and Harold adored my older sister Amanda. She was the golden girl, the pride of the Dawson name. Every Thanksgiving, Amanda was handed the best slice of turkey breast, golden brown and glistening with gravy. She got the first piece of pumpkin pie piled with whipped cream. I, on the other hand, received bones with scraps of meat clinging to them or stuffing scraped from the edge of the pan. My mother would smile as if it were a joke and say Clara is watching her figure. My father would nod as though he agreed that I deserved less. Amanda would smirk, enjoying the show. That became a tradition year after year, a tradition of leftovers. One year when I was 9, I reached timidly for an extra roll from the basket. My mother slapped my hand in front of everyone and said, "Greedy girls do not get dessert." Laughter rippled around the table while Amanda leaned against my father's shoulder and bit into a warm roll. I sat frozen, my hand stinging, my eyes burning. Another year when I was 12, my father shoved my plate aside because I dared to ask for more gravy. The porcelain cracked on the edge of the table, splattering what little food I had onto the floor. Amanda squealed in fake disgust while my mother hissed at me to clean up my mess. I crawled on my knees under the table, gathering scraps while my family kept eating, their voices rising over my silence. Those childhood moments etched themselves into me, scars beneath the surface. When I grew older and moved away, I promised myself that one day I would create my own Thanksgivings full of love and fairness, far away from the cruelty of my parents' table. For years, I managed to keep that promise. I spent holidays with friends, colleagues, sometimes alone with a simple meal and a book. Anything was better than going back. Yet in the back of my mind, I carried the fantasy that maybe someday they would change. Maybe my parents would finally treat me as equal. Maybe my sister would not always be the chosen one. That flicker of hope was the reason I agreed when the invitation arrived this year. I told myself I was stronger now. I had built a life on my own. I had a job I loved, teaching elementary school. I had my own apartment. And most importantly, I had Evan, a man who saw my worth and loved me for it. Surely with Evan beside me, things would be different. Surely they would not dare repeat the past. I was wrong. I thought leftovers were the worst they could give me. I did not know that this time they would try to take more than food away from me. The Dawsons looked perfect from the outside. Margaret Dawson was 58 and always appeared in a pressed blouse, pearl earrings, in place her hair pinned neatly. To neighbors, she was the image of grace. She baked pies for church sales, waved kindly to mail carriers, and remembered birthdays of people she barely knew. Inside the house, her smile hardened into a thin blade. She used kindness as a leash. Her words sounded soft, but every syllable was meant to cut. You will never keep a husband if you cannot cook. Teaching is sweet, but not a real career. Those were her ways of reminding me that whatever I did was not enough. Harold Dawson was 60, a man who carried himself like the head of an empire, though his kingdom was nothing more than a modest house in Spokane and a pension from decades at the paper mill. He spoke rarely, but when he did, his voice had the finality of a gavel. "Amanda is the pride of this family," he would say at gatherings sometimes while I sat silently in the same room. He never praised me. His approval belonged entirely to Amanda. Amanda Dawson, at 31, had always been the jewel of the family crown. She was the daughter my parents displayed to the world. She married young to a man with a promising career in finance, and every achievement of hers became another medal pinned on my parents' chest. My mother would beam, "Amanda bought a new house." My father would boast Amanda hosted Thanksgiving for her husband's colleagues. When I mentioned my small victories, like helping a struggling child in my classroom learn to read, they nodded politely, then changed the subject. Over time, I felt myself erased. The family photo on the mantel was proof. It was from Amanda's wedding day. My parents stood proudly beside her in her white gown. I was cropped out. They had taken the original photo, cut it neatly, and slid it into the frame. When I asked about it, Margaret only said with a smile, "The picture looks cleaner this way." It was not just pictures, it was gifts. Amanda received diamond earrings on her 30th birthday, while I got a cookbook called Simple Meals for Simple Minds. At Christmas, she unwrapped a designer coat. I got socks in the wrong size. Even language became a weapon. At one family dinner, when I mentioned wanting to save for a down payment, my mother said lightly, "Clara always dreams above her station. Amanda deserves a house you can manage with an apartment." The room laughed. I laughed too, because if I did not, the humiliation would choke me. With every passing year, the pattern grew sharper. Amanda was the daughter to display, I was the one to diminish. Evan once told me it sounded like they had written a script with Amanda as the star and me as the scapegoat. He was right. I had lived my entire life in a theater of cruelty staged by my own parents. What hurt most was how natural it felt to them. Margaret's cutting remarks, Harold's cold silences, Amanda's smirks. None of it felt forced. It was their language of love twisted into a language of control. Sometimes I wondered if they even realized what they were doing, or if they simply enjoyed watching me shrink. For years, I avoided their stage. I built distance, carved out a life where their voices could not reach me daily. But blood has a way of pulling you back. When the invitation for Thanksgiving arrived this year, it carried more weight than paper and ink. It carried decades of humiliation disguised as family tradition. And though every instinct screamed, "Stay away," a part of me still hoped perhaps the play would change. Perhaps this year the script would be rewritten. That hope was dangerous, and I did not yet understand how much it would cost me. The invitation arrived in the form of a phone call on a gray November morning. I was grading spelling tests when my phone buzzed with Margaret Dawson flashing across the screen. For a moment, I considered letting it ring out. My mother never called unless there was an occasion for her to control. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Clara." She said, her tone sweet like syrup poured over something rotten. "Thanksgiving is coming. We want you home this year." Home. The word made my stomach tighten. I asked carefully, "Will Amanda be there?" "Of course," Margaret replied, her voice lilting as though it were absurd to ask. "Families should be together." I wanted to remind her that family was what she denied me every year, but I bit back the words. Instead, I said, "I will think about it." That evening, Evan came over, setting his briefcase by the door. He noticed my silence and asked, "What is wrong?" I told him about the call, the invitation, the way my mother's voice carried both demand and judgment. Evan leaned against the counter and crossed his arms. "You know what they do to you," he said gently. "Why even consider it?" "Because a part of me still wants to believe they can change," I admitted. "A part of me still wants to sit at that table and be treated like a daughter, not an afterthought." Evan studied me for a long moment. Then he said, "If you go, do not go unprepared. You are not the little girl they used to humiliate. You have me now, and you have the strength you built. If they try to play the same games, let them, but this time, you will not be powerless." His words steadied me. Still, the thought of stepping back into that house made my chest ache. I remembered Thanksgivings past the sharp sound of my mother's laugh when I dared to reach for more, the sting of my father's hand against my cheek when I spoke up. Yet the invitation pressed on me like a dare. Was I going to keep running forever? The next morning, Amanda sent a group message to me and my parents. She filled it with cheerful emojis and notes about how she would bring her famous cranberry sauce and how wonderful it would be to have everyone together. Margaret responded with hearts. Harold wrote simply, "We are proud of you. No one acknowledged me." I stared at the glowing screen, the thread of messages flowing like I was invisible. My thumb hovered over the keyboard. Finally, I typed, "I will be there." My pulse raced as I hit send. Evan supported me even when he disagreed. "We can drive together," he said, "and if anything happens, we leave immediately." No questions. I nodded, grateful. As the days crept closer, I baked a pumpkin pie from scratch, something I rarely did. It was not just dessert. It was my offering, my proof that I could contribute, that I belonged at that table. I imagined walking in with the pie, setting it down among the other dishes, and for once being acknowledged with gratitude. That fantasy carried me through the week until reality set in. On the night before Thanksgiving, I barely slept. My dreams were filled with images of hands swatting mine away, plates crashing, laughter echoing. When morning came, I dressed carefully, smoothing my hair, packing the pie into a carrier. Evan squeezed my hand before we left. Remember, he said you do not need their approval to be enough. I smiled faintly, but inside, a fragile hope clung to me. Maybe this year would be different. Maybe with Evan beside me, they would think twice before turning me into their scapegoat again. As we drove toward Spokane, the clouds hung low, heavy, and gray. The closer we got, the more my stomach twisted. Childhood memories rose like ghosts whispering warnings. Yet I held tight to the pie on my lap as though it were a shield. I whispered to myself, this time will be different. I had no idea how wrong I was. The Dawson house looked exactly as I remembered when Evan and I pulled into the driveway that Thanksgiving afternoon. The porch light glowed, though it was still daylight. The shrubs trimmed neatly, a wreath of autumn leaves hanging on the door as if this was a welcoming home. My stomach clenched the moment the door opened. Margaret stood there in a cranberry-colored sweater pearls at her neck, her smile wide enough to convince any neighbor she was thrilled to see me. "Clara, dear," she said with feigned delight, "you look rested." Her pause spoke louder than her words. She kissed Evan on the cheek with exaggerated warmth, then brushed past me as though I were furniture. Harold appeared behind her, tall, his expression unreadable. He clapped Evan on the shoulder, but only gave me a curt nod. Inside the house, the table was already set, the long wooden surface gleaming under the chandelier. A golden turkey sat in the center, steam rising, surrounded by bowls of mashed potatoes, green beans, and cranberry sauce. The smell made my stomach twist with both hunger and dread. Amanda breezed in from the kitchen wearing a silk blouse, her hair perfectly curled. She threw her arms around Margaret and Harold, her laughter loud and sweet. When she turned to me, her smile thinned. "Clara," she said, "I did not think you would actually come." I forced a smile. "I brought pie." She looked at the carrier in my hands and gave a small laugh. "Well, it will be nice to have a backup in case Mom's does not turn out." My face heated, but I said nothing. Evan squeezed my hand. Margaret directed everyone to their seats. Amanda was placed directly beside Harold, her plate gleaming with polished silverware. Margaret took the head of the table, Harold the other end. Evan was seated near Amanda, while I was sent to the far side near the kitchen door, barely part of the circle. My place setting lacked a wine glass. Instead, there was a chipped water tumbler. The symbolism was not lost on me. Margaret raised her glass. "Family." She said, her eyes sliding over me as if I were transparent. "We are so blessed to have Amanda here with her husband's successes, and of course, Harold's steady hand guiding us all." She did not say my name. She did not acknowledge my presence except as an afterthought. Evan shifted uncomfortably but stayed silent. The food began to be passed. Harold carved slices of turkey, placing the best cut on Amanda's plate first. Margaret heaped mashed potatoes and ladled gravy for her. When the dishes reached me, the bowl of potatoes was nearly scraped empty, the gravy congealed. Margaret handed me a plate already assembled. It contained limp green beans and a sliver of dark meat clinging to a bone. No gravy, no potatoes. I stared at it, my hands trembling under the table. Evan looked at me with concern, but I forced a smile, unwilling to break so early. Amanda lifted her fork high, showing off her slice glistening with juices. "This turkey is perfect, Mom," she declared, and everyone nodded in approval. Margaret turned to me with mock sweetness. "Clara, be careful with those beans. They can be tough on digestion." Laughter rippled. I swallowed hard. The humiliation felt almost scripted, the same cruel play repeated every year. My chest ached, but I held my ground. I reminded myself of Evan's words. "You are not powerless." Still, as I looked at the table at Amanda glowing in the center, while I sat isolated at the edge with scraps, I felt the old ache of being the unwanted child. The air grew heavier with each passing minute. Conversation flowed easily around Amanda's job, her husband's success, the vacations they took. No one asked me about my classroom, my students, my life. I sat in silence, eating beans that tasted of nothing, waiting for the moment when the cruelty would sharpen further. Deep down, I knew it was coming. Thanksgiving in the Dawson house never ended with kindness. The clatter of silverware filled the dining room, the scent of roasted turkey and buttered rolls thick in the air. From my seat at the far end of the table, I watched as Amanda's plate was loaded again and again. My father carved for her the thickest slices of breast meat, moist and glistening, while my mother spooned a generous helping of mashed potatoes topped with glossy brown gravy. A wedge of pumpkin pie already sat waiting at her side, whipped cream piled high as though she were royalty. My own plate remained unchanged, a gray slice of dark meat clinging to bone-limp beans collapsing into a puddle of congealed juice. I forced myself to chew slowly, but every bite tasted of humiliation. Evan glanced at me, his brow furrowed, but I gave him a tight smile. I did not want to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Amanda lifted her fork dramatically, taking a bite of turkey with a satisfied moan. "This is heavenly," she said, and my mother beamed as though she had been awarded a medal. "Clara Margaret called down the table loud enough for every guest to hear you should be grateful. Not everyone is lucky enough to have food that is light and healthy. Some people cannot manage their weight as well as Amanda." Her eyes flicked to me and lingered. A few relatives chuckled. My face burned hot, my fork shaking. I remembered Evan's advice. "Do not let them see you fall." My father raised his glass. To Amanda, he declared our shining star. The room echoed with agreement. No one raised a glass for me. I pushed beans around my plate, my appetite gone. When I thought it could not sting worse, Amanda leaned back with a grin. "Mom, Dad remember when Clara used to cry if she did not get pie. I swear she begged one year like a toddler." The table erupted in laughter. My mother shook her head with mock pity. "She always was dramatic." My father smirked. "Some children never grow out of tantrums." I gripped my fork so hard it dug into my palm. I wanted to shout, to scream, to throw the plate across the room. But I swallowed it. I thought of the pie I had baked sitting untouched in the kitchen. My pie had not even been brought to the table. I realized then that my offering had been hidden on purpose. Amanda was served first. Amanda was celebrated, Amanda's contributions displayed. Mine had been erased. Evan leaned closer, whispering barely above the noise. "You do not have to take this." His words steadied me, but the ache inside throbbed. Then the moment came. Margaret stood lifting the serving platter. "Who wants seconds?" she asked brightly. Amanda's plate was filled again with turkey and stuffing. My father chuckled. "Amanda needs her strength. She has responsibilities." When the platter reached me, there was little left but shredded bits of meat clinging to cartilage. Margaret scraped them onto my plate with deliberate slowness. "Here you go, Clara," she said. "Leftovers suit you best." The word leftovers cracked against me like a whip. Gasps rippled faintly from one or two guests, but most looked away, complicit in silence. Evan stiffened beside me, his jaw tight. My vision blurred with tears I refused to shed. I lifted my head, staring straight at my mother. "This is not food. This is an insult." The room froze. My father's chair screeched as he stood, his hand slamming across my face in one swift motion. The slap rang louder than the clink of glasses. "Do not disgrace this family," he barked. The sting radiated through my cheek, my ears ringing. Evan pushed back his chair, half risen, but I caught his arm. "Not now," I whispered. Amanda let out a fake sob. "Why does she always ruin everything?" Margaret placed a hand on Amanda's shoulder. Clara always had trouble understanding love. My knees shook beneath the table, but I stayed upright. My heart pounded with rage, humiliation, and something else, a spark of resolve. They had played the same script year after year, but for the first time I felt the urge to flip the stage. I picked up the turkey bone on my plate and laid it gently back down. My voice trembled, but I forced it steady. "You think this makes me small, but one day you will choke on your cruelty." The table fell silent, every eye on me. My father glared, but said nothing. Amanda sniffled dramatically. My mother's smile faltered a crack in her polished mask. Evan's hand squeezed mine beneath the table, grounding me. The meal continued awkwardly, conversation limping back into motion, but something had shifted inside me. I had taken their insult, their violence, and instead of shrinking, I had spoken. For the first time in my life at that table, I had not swallowed it whole. The word leftovers echoed in my skull, not as a wound, but as fuel. I knew now that I would not leave this house defeated. The sting of my father's hand lingered on my cheek long after he sat back down, his jaw tight as though the matter were settled. My pulse roared in my ears, yet the room tried to resume its rhythm forks, scraping plates, glasses, clinking laughter strained but present. Evan's hand remained on mine beneath the table, an anchor against the tide of humiliation. I wanted to scream, but silence fell heavier than sound. Amanda dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, though no tears stained it. She sniffled theatrically and said in a trembling voice, "She always finds a way to make it about herself." Margaret stroked Amanda's hair, her face a portrait of maternal devotion. "Clara never learned gratitude," she said sweetly. Her tone, polished like glass, "We only want what is best for her. She believes everything is an attack." I opened my mouth to speak, but my father cut me off with a glare so sharp it pinned me to the chair. Enough, he barked, his voice like a whip. "You will not embarrass this family again." Evan shifted beside me, his voice calm but firm. "With all respect, sir, what just happened was not discipline. It was violence." The table gasped softly. My father's eyes narrowed. "You have no place lecturing me in my house." Evan's jaw tightened, but he held his ground. Margaret leaned forward, her voice dripping honey. "Evan, you are a good man, but you do not understand Clara's dramatics. She has always twisted things to get attention. We did not raise her to be weak, but she insists on playing the victim." Her words floated in the air, a net of gaslighting designed to entangle me. My throat ached. I wanted to shout, "I am not making this up. I am not twisting anything but the weight of years pressed down." How many times had I been told that my pain was imagination, that my wounds were overreactions? Amanda giggled, suddenly breaking the tension. "Remember when she pretended to faint at the 4th of July barbecue? She just wanted everyone to look at her." That was the day I had heat stroke, but in Amanda's telling it became performance. The guests chuckled, the narrative reshaped in seconds. I stared at my sister, her smirk bright in the candlelight, and I felt my chest burn. The room tilted between reality and the story they wanted everyone to believe. I pressed my hand to my cheek, where the slap still throbbed, grounding myself. Evan whispered, "You know the truth. Hold on to it." His words cut through the haze. My father raised his fork again, as if signaling that the matter was closed. "Eat," he ordered. "Show respect at this table." I stared at the scraps on my plate bones and limp beans, and a quiet rage spread through me. Respect was a word they wielded like a weapon. Respect meant silence, obedience erasure. My mother's eyes glittered with triumph as she poured Amanda more wine. "Look how strong she is," Margaret said, "not like Clara, who crumbles at the smallest things." Her tone was sugar, her words poison. Gaslighting had become their family language. My mind flashed back to childhood, to every moment I was told my memory was wrong, that my feelings were exaggerations, that Amanda never hurt me, that I must have misheard, misremembered, misunderstood. I realized then that the pattern was not random. It was deliberate, refined over years, until cruelty became tradition. My heart pounded with a dangerous clarity. They wanted me to break in front of the guests, to storm out and confirm their story that I was unstable. I would not give them that satisfaction. I sat straighter, my voice steady though soft. "I am done pretending," I said. The table paused. Amanda scoffed. "Done pretending what? That you are the victim?" Margaret laughed lightly, patting Amanda's hand. "Poor Clara, she imagines shadows where there is only light." My father shook his head in disgust. "Pathetic." Evan squeezed my hand, his voice low only for me. "Let them talk. You will show them later." I breathed deeply, forcing my pulse to slow. They believed they had won again, that I was silenced. But inside, something had shifted. The slap, the laughter, the gaslighting that followed it no longer felt like the end. It felt like evidence. I ate one more bite of beans, my face calm, though my heart raged, and thought to myself, this time I will not leave empty-handed. This time I will make them see. I excused myself from the table after dessert was served, though dessert for me was nothing more than a crust of pie slid onto a cracked plate, while Amanda received a perfect golden slice crowned with whipped cream. My cheeks still stung from the slap, my heart heavy with the chorus of gaslighting, but I kept my steps steady as I rose. I told them I needed a moment and walked toward the guest bedroom at the end of the hall. Margaret's eyes followed me suspicious, but she said nothing. Behind the closed door, I leaned against the wall, breathing hard, and reached into the pocket of my coat where a small device lay hidden. Evan had slipped it to me before we left for Spokane, telling me quietly, "This might be useful." It was a tiny voice recorder, no larger than my thumb, with hours of memory. I had dismissed it as unnecessary, convinced I could endure another Thanksgiving without evidence. Now, as my cheek throbbed, I understood why he had insisted. I pressed the record button and tucked the device back into my pocket. When I returned to the table, I wore a mask of calm. Amanda was telling a story about her husband's promotion, Margaret laughing too loudly, Harold nodding with pride. I slipped into my chair and quietly angled the pocket toward the center of the table. The conversation flowed, and soon the words I had always heard in private began to spill in public. Margaret leaned toward Amanda and said, if only Clara would learn to behave, maybe she would deserve more than scraps. Harold grunted. She never did. That girl has always been a disappointment. Amanda giggled, swirling wine in her glass. She should be grateful we even let her come. Every sentence etched itself onto the recorder. I felt my pulse quicken. For years, their cruelty had lived only in memory, dismissed as exaggeration whenever I tried to explain. Now it had weight. Now it had proof. Evan caught my eye across the table, his gaze steady, telling me without words that he knew what I was doing. The evening dragged on with stories that exalted Amanda and diminished me. Whenever I spoke, Margaret cut me off. Harold rolled his eyes. Amanda smirked. It was the same script, but this time I played a different role. I baited them with small comments, subtle enough to appear naive, but sharp enough to draw their venom. When Amanda bragged about her new car, I asked lightly, "Did Dad help with the down payment?" She laughed. "Yes, of course he would never let me struggle." My father added, "Amanda deserves the best, not like some people who wasted their money on silly apartments." The recorder captured every word. When my mother described Amanda's charity work, I murmured, "Must be nice to be so recognized." Margaret's eyes narrowed, and she replied sharply, "Recognition comes when you earn it. Some people never do." The recorder clicked softly, storing her disdain. Each exchange was a dagger, but also a gift. The evidence piled up minute by minute, a mountain of contempt they could never deny. At one point, Amanda leaned close, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You will never be more than the girl with leftovers, Clara. That is who you are." My chest burned, but I did not flinch. Instead, I smiled thinly and said, "Perhaps." Her laughter rang cruel and confident. She did not realize her own words would be the noose tightening around her. Hours later, when plates were cleared and guests moved into the living room for coffee, I slipped away again to the guest bedroom. I checked the recorder. The red light blinked steadily, proof of an entire evening's worth of degradation. I transferred the files quickly to Evan's laptop. When he joined me minutes later, his eyes scanned the waveforms on the screen. "You did it," he whispered. "You caught them." My hands trembled as I saved the files onto a flash drive he pulled from his bag. I could barely believe it. After years of silence, I had their voices trapped, their cruelty undeniable. Evan squeezed my shoulder. "Tomorrow before dinner we show them." My stomach twisted with fear and anticipation. Could I really do it, expose them in their own house, strip away the mask they wore for the world? The thought of their rage terrified me, yet the thought of letting them continue unchecked terrified me more. I closed the laptop, slipped the flash drive into my bag, and whispered to myself, "No more leftovers." The next day dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to press down on the earth. I barely slept, replaying every word captured on the recorder, every sneer and insult now preserved in digital permanence. Evan was already awake when I stirred his eyes steady, his laptop open, with the files queued and ready. "Today is the day," he said quietly. My stomach nodded, but I nodded. "Today!" Margaret greeted us at breakfast with her usual smile that felt more like a mask. Amanda sat at the table glowing in her silk robe, her plate piled with eggs and bacon. A single slice of dry toast was placed before me. Evan started to protest, but I touched his hand beneath the table. Not yet. By afternoon, preparations for the final Thanksgiving dinner resumed, Margaret bustling in the kitchen, Harold setting out wine, Amanda humming while arranging flowers. Guests arrived again, cousins and a few neighbors, all eager to bask in the Dawson charm. The house filled with laughter and chatter, none of them aware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Dinner was announced just as the sun slipped below the horizon, candles flickering across the long table. Once again, Amanda was seated at the center, her plate gleaming with polished silverware, her wine glass filled first. I was placed at the edge, the chipped tumbler waiting as though to remind me of my position. But tonight was different. Tonight I was not just a scapegoat. Tonight I carried truth in my bag. Margaret lifted her glass, her voice ringing. Family is our greatest blessing. We are proud of Amanda and all she has achieved. To Amanda. The room echoed with toasts. I raised my glass, but my eyes remained fixed on my mother. My pulse raced. When the first course was served, Amanda's plate was once again filled with steaming soup and fresh bread. My bowl held lukewarm broth, thin and watery. I forced a smile, my heart pounding. Evan leaned close. Are you ready? I swallowed hard. Yes. As the main course arrived, Margaret carried in the platters with a flourish. Turkey carved perfectly potatoes, whipped to smooth perfection gravy, rich and thick. Amanda's plate overflowed with abundance. Mine was set last, a heap of soggy vegetables and a shard of turkey bone. Margaret's voice carried brightly across the table. Clara always gets something special. The word special dripped like poison. Laughter rippled faintly among the guests. That was the cue. I stood slowly, the room falling quiet. My chair scraped the floor as I carried my bag to the center of the table. Margaret frowned. Clara, what are you doing? I smiled, my voice calm but sharp. Showing everyone what special really means. I pulled out Evan's laptop, placed it on the table beside the platters of food, and connected the small portable speaker. Gasps echoed. My father growled, Sit down, you are making a fool of yourself. I pressed play. At once, the room filled with Margaret's voice, crystal clear. If only Clara would learn to behave, maybe she would deserve more than scraps. A hush fell, forks frozen mid-air. Harold's recorded grunt followed. That girl has always been a disappointment. Amanda's laughter rang from the speaker. She should be grateful we even let her come. The guests shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting from me to my parents. Margaret's face blanched, but I let the recording play on. More voices, more cruelty. Margaret again. Recognition comes when you earn it. Some people never do. Amanda giggled. You will never be more than the girl with leftovers. That is who you are. The words rang in the air like a verdict. I paused the recording, my gaze sweeping the table. For years, you told me I imagined it. For years, you convinced everyone I was unstable, dramatic, weak. But this is your voice, your words. You cannot deny them now. Evan stood behind me, his presence solid. The room was silent except for the crackle of the speaker. My mother finally spoke, her voice sharp with panic. This is absurd. Someone must have tampered with it. My father slammed his fist on the table. Enough! Turn it off! I met his eyes unflinching. No, you made me live with your cruelty and silence. Tonight the silence ends. I pressed play again this time. The recording of Amanda's sneer. You will never be more than leftovers. The sound was unmistakable, her tone dripping with disdain. Amanda's face crumpled, her hands trembling. That is not me, she stammered, but the lie fell flat. Cousins whispered to each other, shocked. A neighbor muttered, My God, under his breath. Then Richard, my father's brother, stood slowly from his chair. His face was pale, but his voice steady. I have watched this family for years. I have seen the way you treat Clara. Tonight, there is no hiding. You have disgraced yourselves. His words carried weight. Harold's face flushed red. Margaret's hands shook. Amanda's lips trembled. They looked less like a family and more like actors stripped of costumes. The mask had fallen. My father rose his chair, scraping violently. "Get out!" he shouted at me. "You are no daughter of mine." My heart pounded, but my voice was calm. "You are right. I am not your daughter anymore. I am free." I closed the laptop, the silence heavier than any words. The guests shifted uneasily, chairs moving back. Some stood, others looked at Margaret and Harold with disgust. Amanda burst into tears, but no one comforted her. Evan stepped forward, wrapping his arm around me. "We are leaving," he said. But before we reached the door, Richard spoke again, his voice cold and final. "The truth is out. You cannot bury it anymore. You wanted her gone, and now it is you who will be left behind." Margaret cried out, "No, please, Thomas, do not turn away from me." But her husband, Harold, did not move to comfort her. The last thing I heard as Evan and I stepped into the cold night was my mother's voice cracking into a scream of rage and desperation. The air outside was sharp with November cold, yet my body burned with adrenaline as Evan guided me down the steps. Behind us, the Dawson house pulsed with raised voices, chairs scraping Margaret's wails, splitting the night. I should have felt empty, but instead, a strange calm settled in. For the first time in my life, the truth had been spoken out loud, undeniable, irreversible. We reached the car, and Evan helped me inside, his hands steady though his eyes betrayed the storm he had just witnessed. As we drove away, the headlights cutting through mist, I pressed the flash drive against my palm like a talisman. "Tomorrow we take this to the police," Evan said firmly. My throat tightened, but I nodded. Enough was enough. The next morning, we walked into the Spokane police station. My cheek was still bruised from my father's slap, a visible mark that drew immediate attention from the officer at the desk. Evan explained clearly, handing over the flash drive. The officer listened, brows lifting, as the audio spilled from the speakers in a sterile interview room. Margaret's syrupy cruelty, Harold's disdain, Amanda's vicious laughter. When the slap rang out on the recording, followed by my choked protest, the officer stopped the playback. "Ma'am, this qualifies as assault and emotional abuse," he said gravely. "Would you like to press charges?" My answer came without hesitation. Yes. Paperwork was filed, statements taken, and within days a temporary restraining order was issued against Margaret and Harold. They were forbidden from contacting me or approaching within 100 yards. Amanda tried to call from a blocked number, but I ignored every attempt. Soon, even she grew silent. The community's reaction spread quickly. Neighbors who had long admired the Dawsons' perfect image now looked at them with suspicion. Word of the recording leaked through whispers at church, through cousins who could not hold their tongues. Margaret stopped attending services, claiming illness, while Harold kept to himself, his once commanding presence reduced to a shadow. Then Richard called. His voice carried both sorrow and resolution. "I have filed for divorce," he said. "Margaret's behavior has spiraled beyond control. She bans phones from the house, mutters about spies, and accuses anyone who questions her of betrayal. I should have spoken sooner, but I lacked courage. You gave me that courage, Clara." Tears pricked my eyes, though I tried to keep them steady. "Thank you," I whispered. "No," he replied. "Thank you for surviving long enough to show us the truth." Within weeks, Margaret was served papers. Harold raged, denying everything, but even he could not silence the community's disgust. Amanda's husband filed for separation after hearing her voice sneer from the recording. He had believed her sweetness for years. Now he saw the malice underneath. The family unit I had known fractured completely. At school, my colleagues noticed the bruise fading from my face, their kindness a balm I had never felt at home. Evan remained by my side, steady and proud. One evening, as we sat on my apartment balcony, he told me, "You have reclaimed your voice. They can never take it back." Yet the Dawsons did not disappear quietly. Margaret left messages from burner phones, her voice alternating between honeyed apologies and venomous curses. One night she whispered, "You will regret this, Clara. You turned my son against me." Another letter arrived by mail with no return address. It read, "You may think you have won, but families cannot be destroyed by lies." I kept every message, filing them with the police. Each attempt only added weight to the case building against them. Then came the court date. Standing before a judge, I recounted my childhood, the years of belittlement, the humiliation, the slap heard, not just in my ears, but across the speaker for all to witness. Evan presented the audio, each word from their mouths a nail in the coffin of denial. The judge's face hardened. This is not discipline. This is abuse. With those words, the restraining order became permanent. Margaret and Harold were barred from contacting me or attending family gatherings. Amanda was reprimanded, though not charged. Her reputation shredded nonetheless. Walking out of the courthouse that day, sunlight cut through the clouds. I felt taller, lighter, as though the years of weight pressing me into the shadows had finally lifted. The consequences were not just legal, they were personal. Margaret and Harold now lived in isolation, shunned by neighbors who once admired them. Amanda moved back into their crumbling house, abandoned by her husband, her social circle evaporating, and me, I found freedom. For the first time, Thanksgiving no longer meant humiliation. It meant survival. It meant victory. It meant that leftovers were no longer mine to carry. They belonged to the Dawsons, the remnants of a family consumed by its own cruelty. Thanksgiving night returned a year later with a different weight. Instead of the cold Dawson house filled with cruelty, I sat at a small wooden table in my own apartment. Evan had roasted a modest turkey, nothing extravagant, and Richard joined us carrying a bottle of wine. The smell of cinnamon and pumpkin pie drifted through the air. This time the laughter was real, the warmth genuine. I looked at the plates before us and realized how extraordinary it felt to be given the same serving as everyone else. No scraps, no leftovers, no shame. Just food shared equally, an act so simple yet so powerful after a lifetime of denial. Richard raised his glass. To new traditions, he set his eyes soft. Evan echoed, "To freedom." I lifted mine, my throat thick. "To finally being enough." We clinked glasses, and the sound carried more meaning than any toast from my parents ever had. For weeks after the court ruling, I had struggled with waves of anger, grief, even guilt. Breaking away from family is never clean, never painless, but each time Margaret's voice tried to echo in my head, telling me I was dramatic or ungrateful. I remembered the courtroom, the judge's words, the permanent order that protected me. They cannot touch you anymore. That truth became my armor. One afternoon while walking home from school, I saw Amanda across the street. She looked smaller, thinner, her once bright hair dull. She avoided my gaze and hurried away. For a moment, pity tugged at me, but then I remembered her laughter at the table, the words, "You will never be more than leftovers." Pity vanished. Choices had consequences. That night, Evan asked if I regretted anything. I thought carefully before answering. Regret, I said slowly, is for people who did not try. I tried for years to earn their love to prove I belonged. They chose cruelty every time. Now I choose freedom. Evan kissed my forehead and whispered, "That is why you are stronger than all of them." Months passed, and my classroom flourished. I poured my energy into my students, into building something positive out of the ashes of what I had endured. Every success, every smile from a child reminded me I was not the girl they tried to make me. I was not leftovers. I was a whole person capable of love, of resilience, of joy. On the morning of Thanksgiving this year, I baked a pumpkin pie again. As I slid it from the oven, I thought of all the years I had hidden my effort, my worth, only to have it erased. Now the pie sat proudly on the table, golden and fragrant, a symbol of survival. Richard helped carve the turkey. Evan poured wine, and I sat at the head of the table for the first time in my life. When Richard asked if I missed the old house, I smiled faintly. "No," I said, "because that was never my home. This is—" The words felt final, like a door closing on decades of pain. Later, as we sat on the couch watching the city lights flicker through the window, Evan wrapped his arm around me. "Are you okay?" he asked. I leaned against him, listening to the soft rhythm of his heart. "Better than okay," I said. "I am free." Outside, the night was quiet. No screams, no gaslighting, no forced smiles. Only peace. The Dawson name remained across town broken and hollow, but their power over me was gone. They had given me leftovers all my life, and in trying to keep me small, they had lost everything. I looked at Evan and Richard at the empty plates that once held turkey and pie, and I realized freedom was not about escaping them. Freedom was about reclaiming myself. That was the real Thanksgiving gift, one they could never take away again.